Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. My name is Martin Warwick and I'm talking with Jeff Baher, Marketing Leader at Dell, and with Bala Pichakani, also from Dell. Bala is Senior Director, this is a big job title, Pan Dell NFE Strategy and Product Management. Not that long ago, SDN and NFV were never the twain shall meet. They're very, very complementary technologies, and there's a sort of notion that they might meet at infinity at some infinite points in the future. But that point was pretty infinite. And now we're seeing, for the first time since NFV really hit the headlines a couple of years ago, we're seeing two technologies being mentioned in the same breath as being complementary to one another and even closer than we thought they might have been. Not quite conjoined, but well on the way to being like that. What does that mean, Jeff? Is it some kind of sea change within the industry and with NFV and SDN, or is it just happenstance?
Well, I think it's a natural evolution. The starting point for SDN and NFE were clearly different. They saw different sets of problems that they were looking to solve with the technologies. So this event here, NFE World Congress, the backdrop, obviously NFE, and that is the primary direction that the carriers are looking to go with technologies. However, when they go down that path, network functions, virtualization, invariably the topic of the network itself then becomes a big part of that discussion, and just how do I virtualize that? And that is exactly the point at which we then dovetail with software-defined networking technologies. Okay. So it is a very natural kind of evolution that we would come to that conclusion.
Well, you're nodding sagely there. Have you got anything to add to that, or are you just agreeing?
Absolutely. I think to add on to what Jeff pointed out, we look at actually when enterprises look at the product, they talk about SDN. So they kind of think about SDN from one point of view. But then when telcos look at it, like Jeff pointed out, they talk about network function virtualization. So they're coming from the top view. So when it comes together, it's the place actually with the telco side of it. It's like SDN is enabling NFE to happen, and enabling NFV is forcing some very specific constructs to be defined very crisply in SDN. So yeah, I think the telco market is really trying to bring them together to provide the integrated value. So it's a pretty exciting time.
It's interesting, isn't it, the change that's taking place. Now let's move on to customers. What are your customers asking for? And Dell, what is Dell's NFE solution? I don't know who wants to answer that, but gentlemen, either of you.
I'll start, perhaps. Yeah. So I think at the highest level, this is really about choice. So we're talking about an architectural shift for carriers. If we would maybe look at this as the third big architecture, from traditional PTSN, voice, to the IP first generation network, to now what we're doing with NFE.
Right.
There's a big opportunity now to shake up the ecosystem that makes up that infrastructure, and from our perspective, an opportunity to turn the industry really on its end, from what has been more vertical, siloed offerings to a horizontal offering, not unlike the way the server industry had developed over the last 20 years.
Right.
So from that perspective, Dell focuses on the infrastructure, server, storage, networking, the associated software, to then present that as a single element. But that provides a base for many different personalities to then be attached. So that is what drives this choice and the many different combinations that carriers are seeking with the technologies.
Yep, to add on to what Jeff pointed out, I think, like Jeff said, we are trying to take it from vertically siloed things, and a lot of new proprietaries today that are getting announced. It's kind of a little sad, because that is not what our customers are looking for. They're not looking for one more vertical solution. They're looking for that horizontal platform in which they can plug and play different applications. So from a Dell and Intel perspective, what we are really doing is to make sure we provide the right subsystems and the right building blocks to provide that platform in a very robust, almost as we call it, can you bring up a NFV over lunch break? And people sometimes say, what do you mean? It's a cloud, it takes days. No, that is where the customers are really catering to, because they really are not focused on the foundation. They want the foundation to be very rock solid so they can plug in stuff. So that's kind of what we are hearing from our customers.
I'm glad to hear you say that, what we're hearing from our customers, because you have to dig the footings, you have to get the foundation in first, and as you said, it's got to be rock solid before you can build a superstructure on that. Yep. And as we know from NFV in particular, it's an initiative that has been driven by your customers, been driven by the telcos and the operators themselves, who've said, we don't want to be locked into a particular vendor, we don't want to be locked necessarily into a particular proprietorial standard. where does Dell, what's your philosophy as far as that is concerned? Do you agree with the fact that there shouldn't be proprietary
Yes.
standards? Because what we're seeing in many cases, and we'll come on to it perhaps in a bit more detail in a minute, is there are emerging some of the little silos, even in NFE, which is predicated on not being like that.
Yeah, let me start there. I think it's an excellent question. Like Jeff mentioned, ours is about open choices. So Dell is always about the choice we want to provide even at the foundation, where you can actually literally customize and pick the choices you want. So be it hardware acceleration, be it actually different software stacks you want to use. And it's not only about that choice that we're talking about. We're also talking about making sure from a customer point of view that we are able to kind of provide them the ability to kind of bring in very different faceted value out of the same foundation. I think that is pretty much, I think, what makes us very differentiated. And that is what seems to resonate with customers, because just because actually they're trying to do IMS today or EPC tomorrow or CPE some other day, the foundation cannot change. It got to be the same foundation. You can build a big Italian-looking house, or you can build actually a Spanish-looking house. The foundation got to be the same. And that's actually what we offer, and that's kind of what makes it very interesting and unique.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting dynamic, is that we are providing that foundation, but the thought process coming from the customer is really from the top down.
Right.
And it's a discussion around incumbency. Do I want to work with the suppliers I have been? Do I want to switch with different? The associated architectures that I would want to be investing in. Each of those decisions then drives different requirements as you work your way down from the top to the bottom. Our goal is to establish a foundation that can catch as many of those different combinations that would be coming from the top down.
Thank you. Something else which is emblematic of what's happening in the industry at the moment are the number of collaborations, partnerships, and companies that formerly were at daggers drawn with each other and would in some cases pretend the other one didn't even exist, right? And now collaborating and working together as a matter of routine and course. I know that Dell works a lot with Intel. So can you tell us what Dell's relationship with Intel is, specifically in terms of the NFE market?
You want to go first?
Yeah, so we work very closely with Intel. Obviously, the backdrop of the discussion around NFE is COTS x86 architecture. So obviously that is a big opportunity for the Dell PowerEdge servers. We work very closely with Intel, obviously from a chip supplier, from the CPU perspective. But what's interesting with NFE is not only just the traditional server capabilities, but NFE and the specific virtual network functions draw on the server in new ways. And that calls upon technologies like DPDK, so data plane acceleration capabilities, other what we would refer to as foundational software and hardware hooks that need to be there in place in order for the NFE platform, which could be a server or a whole complex of servers, to perform at the level that the carrier is expected. So there is a very strong partnership with Intel to make sure that what we're delivering at the system level really can deliver at that performance envelope.
Yep, and also to add to that one, like we talked about hardware acceleration as one of the example. So when we talk about a foundation, we want to build a platform. We want to make sure this platform can be used in multiple places. So it's not just about, yes, we want to make sure it's x86 based, but also thinking like maybe Intel Niantic NIC card or Intel Quick Assist technology that you have. So our partnership with Intel enables us to kind of bring all these pieces together. It is not just 1 + 1 + 1 is 3, but even beyond that, and with Dell added on top of it, this really becomes a very robust foundation. That's kind of a testament to what we do with Intel.
Can we move on to another subject area that is intimately bound with SDNNFE, which is of course the concept of openness? There seems to be almost as many concepts of openness as there are vendors across the planet. There's talk about open source, there's talk about open platforms, there's talk about open ecosystems and so on. As far as Dell is concerned, and in your collaboration with Intel, what does open mean to you?
Open is really at the heart of everything that we do in developing systems and in our approach to the market and to customers. At the heart of that is an adherence to standards, and I think we have a great track record through the years of developing systems and solutions that adhere to those standards. That develops obviously a nice opportunity for Dell, but more importantly for the ecosystem that can really surround that. And what we found through the years is the the broader the participation from a standards perspective, the greater the ecosystem, the greater the rate of innovation. And that ultimately has played out well for all of those that play in that.
Yeah, actually, in fact, we actually have an article out there actually which kind of talks about as the NFE and the IT choices. And when we think about open, it is not just open as one small thing. It's about open standards. It's about open source. It's about open protocols. It's about open ecosystem and open enablement of a modular environment. It's a combination of all these 5 openness, because open by itself is a buzzword, right? So we need to exactly qualify what it is.
Exactly.
And you can kind of read as to how Dell looks at the whole point of view, and it's actually all about making sure it is open, modular, and extendable. Because today, this is why when we talk about a horizontal capability, we talk about this actually as being open, modular, Lego block-like, and it's extendable as into how you want to scale it. But when we start looking at proprietaries that's coming up, we realize actually, first of all, while they use the word open, is it modular? Is it extendable? Yeah. So all those things become a clear challenge, and the operators are not able to kind of plug in things that the way they want to do it.
So we talked about the concept of openness. What do you make of the different bodies, the agencies, the industry bodies within the industry, within NFV and SDN? What about OPNFE? There seems to be quite a lot of traction behind that. And a lot of people are saying this is the venue, this is the site, this is the place to be where all this can be discussed, thrashed out, argued.
Good question, actually. So in fact, if you look at Dell, I think I want to start from SDNNFE, which is because it was operator-led actually to OPNFE.
Yep.
And we obviously was one of the very early folks from a vendor perspective who were part of SDNNFE. And one of the things that people would notice is today, with lots of proof of concepts out there on SDNNFE, there is only one proof of concept today. That's a framework proof of concept, and that is Dell's Cloud NFE. And that gives the fact that Dell has always been thinking about a framework, how do you put them together. And we learned it in that model. And candidly, after learning it with SDNNFE, we now actually are working with actually OPNFE, and we are trying to bring in, call it the open source version of how do you build that open implementation available. And obviously, we are not driving it from our driver's seat, but actually we are influencing it from our perspective. Yes, we have a board seat in OPNFE, but it is still operator-led stuff. And that understanding from a framework that you have learned in Cloud NFE is what we're applying here. And so from a Dell vantage point, what this means is OPNFE is the right umbrella that brings in the different open sources and make sure, like I said, it's open, modular, and extendable. Are these actually modular enough? Can I really do these Lego blocks fit? And OPNFE helps to do that. So this does not mean other things are not important. They are all the right Lego blocks we need, be it Linux, be it OpenStack, be it Open Daylight, but those are Lego blocks that come together, and OPNFE enables to bring them together as a complete solution.
Right, interesting answer.
Yeah, and there's also very nice synergy with Intel's Open Network Platform for servers and the OPNFE elements. So we're working, very closely with aligning to ONP, but also then aligning to the open source offerings with OPNFE.
As far as, we can go back to NFE and SDN when we started. What is the value proposition, do you think, of those two, the virtualization side of it and the software definition side of it? What's the value proposition of that as far as your clients and customers are concerned, basically the end users who provide services to us as end users?
Yeah, but let's start actually with the NFV, because it's like whether it's top down and SDN being bottom up.
Yeah.
So the value proposition actually from an NFV perspective is really the virtual network functions or the VNFs. So it's all about being able to run your applications, workloads, if you want to use the enterprise verbiage, on any standard hardware. So from that perspective, I think the value is really to be able to harness and leverage different capabilities on a same standard platform. One of the biggest examples we talk about is we sit here right next to Levi Stadium. We say, on a Friday evening when there is actually a game, guess what? Everybody's probably doing texting. So the same platform have to be able to support IMS, multiple instances of it, multiple racks. But when they go home, that same infrastructure now needs to actually run probably a CDN or something for what means clicking Netflix and looking at some movies. So that ability to change and dynamically move those VNFs on the same physical infrastructure, that's the value people are looking at from a top-down NFV perspective or the VNF perspective. But then that brings in a lot of challenges on the network. Right? It is not that simple. That's why we call it software-defined. But the key question there is how do you service chain that software-defined environment to be able to provide the differentiated services? And the example I always tell recently is we had this world match on the boxing happen recently. I mean, pay-per-view crashed. Why? It's not because actually people didn't think about it. It's because differentiated services. One person was getting $100 for home, another person was getting $4,000 for business. How do you differentiate that, and how do you create different quality of services, and how do you really provide that rating for those? That's all somehow had to be done in the infrastructure, and you need to be software defined it and not somebody hand carve it. So that's a different problem, and being able to do that separately is kind of the challenges and value that we can add.
That's a really good example. Like, yeah, very good.
And I would just add to that too that maybe less from a technology perspective, but when we look at SDN or even NFE, we're looking at a decoupling or a disaggregation of hardware and software.
Right.
Now you could buy both of those still from the same vendor, but what is also maybe more interesting is that you could procure both from different vendors. That ultimately shines the light on the value of the hardware and the value of the software independently. So that I think is an interesting kind of shakeup for certain vendors that have been selling hardware and software and made it in a way that it's kind of inextricably tied. This is really about choice for customers so that they can procure and innovate at different rates the hardware and the software, and for very good reasons. In this use case, that's a real reason. If those features that you need are tied to a specific hardware platform, then it slows the rate at which you could even roll out a capability like that. So this is really about feature velocity, choice, and creating as many different combinations over this platform that the customer needs.
Final question to you. What are you both seeing? What are your customers saying to you? What are they asking for in Dell service today?
Excellent question. It's not just about Dell. So first is server as a server as a server, right? I think that's the first thing actually our customers asking us to acknowledge. Having said that, they're expecting actually the server form factor to, doesn't matter how small it is or how big it is, that whole scale of things to be able to scale from an unstaffed POP all the way to a hyperscale data center. We have provided form factors that can actually support all the different gamut of things and still provide that same common foundation from a top level perspective, right? And to do that, like for example, as Dell we look at it, we kind of almost have 4 different form factors that we actually have. We have the rack-based implementation, I call them the pizza boxes, or you have the chassis-based traditional approaches, or actually we actually have what we call as converged, which is our FX2 series, which kind of provides you the best of both worlds. And then we have hyperscale deployments, which is almost like a really custom-built, purpose-built for Web 2.0 kind of deployments. And so our customers, when they look at it, they're like, we like these different form factors, we understand this makes sense, but what's the commonality? How do I make sure I manage them in the right form?
Yeah.
So that way, manageability is still so seamless, while it is sitting actually probably in some place, actually in some street or something around unstaffed POP. The manageability of that particular box should be the same as I manage a hyperscale data center's boxes. And that's what they're asking for, and that's exactly what we deliver with our iDRAC and our lifecycle controller.
Yeah, so I would add to that. So manageability, serviceability, and the other thing is our expertise in data centers. So in many cases, this is a proposition around building out data centers of various sizes. It could be all the way down to an unstaffed point of presence, as Bala mentioned. It could, in many other cases, be hyperscale, very cloud-like environment. This is what we've really grown up around with our server franchise. We've powered some of the largest enterprise data centers, some of the largest public cloud provider environments. So that learning and that expertise and best practices is also what gets infused into the servers and into what we offer for our customers.
Good stuff. We obviously live in interesting times.
We do.
As the Chinese curse says. So Jeff Baher and Bala Pichakani, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time.